And very happy you could join us here this morning. So we're broadcasting live from the Housing Europe Centre, so the headquarters of Housing Europe here in Brussels. And this is the second edition of our new series of Innovation Bites webinars. And here we're trying to look at how we can make sure the Green Deal, so the raft of legislation coming through to support the Green Deal, actually also supports our mission in providing decent housing for all. So it's, as you can imagine, it's quite a challenge to bring those two objectives together, but we are sure we can do it. So this morning we're going to focus in on one of the topics that's going to be very much on the agenda next year when we're looking at the 2040 emission target reductions and how we can really have a realistic framework to meet the ambitious 2050 targets. So the challenge within our sector, of course, is how we can reduce emissions without reducing the supply and the availability of affordable housing. Because as we know, indeed, the emissions produced by construction of housing and the extraction of materials used in that construction is significant. So what we want to do is to make sure we ask the right questions, have the right policy conversations, so that indeed we can hit both birds with one stone in a way, so that we can reduce carbon emissions without compromising our ability to deliver homes for very much needed homes when we look at the current need for affordable homes. So how is it going to run this morning? We're going to kick off with one of my colleagues, Clara Maffei, will actually take a deep dive into a specific project we've been working on. So that's the Drive Zero project. So Drive Zero is just one of the initiatives which we have focused on to help social housing providers deliver on the circular economy goals and working also on the reuse of materials and the reuse of facades. So Clara is going to give us a short overview of that specific project, the Drive Zero project. Then we will have a chance to actually hear from a few of Housing Europe members. So we will kick off with an inspiring example actually that's just been implemented from a member of the Irish Council of Social Housing, to a Housing, and we will have Kate Joyce is going to join us from Dublin and talk a little bit about the process they went through to convert office buildings to housing. So optimal use of existing materials and existing buildings in that case. We will then take a little bit of a step back, and we will travel to France and hear from Karine Puyol. She will join us here in the office. Karine is from the Union Sociale pour l'Habitat, and she will talk about the initiative of some of social housing providers in France, how they have been working on collective purchasing of reused materials, and of course densification. And we will kick off. We will end the first part of that session with chatting with Josefina Lindblom from the European Commission, and she's working on this topic at DG Environment. We will then move on and we will hear from Public Housing Sweden. Our colleague Björn Bergen will talk about, actually go into a little bit of a glossary, talk about the words we use when we talk about reducing embodied energy. And very curious to hear about that from a country which is indeed quite advanced in this field. And following on, we will hear from Fernando Sichos, and hear about how we can work together to bring down emissions in the social public housing, but from the perspective of European Builders Confederation. So looking forward to the session, and I think we're going to kick off now with Clara, who's going to join us here, and a deep dive into the Drive Zero, what you've been busy with in that project, Clara.
Yes, thank you, Sorka. Good morning, everyone. My name is Clara Maffei. I'm an Innovation and Project Officer at Housing Europe. And I'd like to introduce you to the Drive Zero project, where Housing Europe has been involved for the past 4 years, partnering together with small, medium, and even big manufacturing companies, alongside with universities and research centers, to essentially explore together more circular, less resource-intensive ways of renovating homes. So it was a project funded by the Horizon 2020 program from 2019 to 2023. So it's ending this year in December. And with a total cost of just over 4 million euros. So the aim of the project was to essentially transform market-ready renovation products and concepts to take them to the next level and make them circular. But product development did not happen in a vacuum, but it was quite a lot of work and effort was done to contextualize this product development, taking into account needs and the availability of resources at local level. The project also focused on reusing materials and bio-based materials in this construction, and with a great focus on modular plug-and-play prefabricated solutions. As well, the project considered more circular manufacturing and installation processes and the business models of the industry that were taking part in the project. So the project rolled out several renovation solutions across the EU, different countries, different climates, different contexts. So in this case, we focused in the Netherlands, in Ireland, in Spain, in Estonia, in Italy, in Slovenia, and in Greece. And here you can see the before and after renovation pictures of the different demonstration sites. So quite a big change. And that's the impact of the project. So I'd like to quickly have a look, zooming into two of the demonstration sites. One of them in Athlone in Ireland. So this was a circular model of retrofit of these semi-detached houses owned by the West Mid County Council, so council housing. And the deployment was off-site production of 2D facades and 3D porch additions, as you can see. And circularity was considered from the start. So during the design, the different panels produced and fabricated integrated the design for disassembly approach, meaning that the panels were designed already with the future in mind, so that they can be reused and adapted for future use in other buildings. The panels were also used bio-based materials in the production, and part of the renovation package also included the use of renewable energy sources that eventually managed to achieve a 65% energy uplift by the end of the project. So here you can see the before and after pictures of renovation. So a massive change, not only visually, but also in terms of reduction of carbon emissions, reduction of energy use, and of comfort for the social housing tenants. And here you can see the installation process, where you can see the cranes bringing in the already made panels off-site at the factory, easy to install. Here the 3D volumetric additions to the porch as well. And another of the pilot cases that the Drive Zero project funded was located in Tallinn in Estonia that use a similar methodology actually. So prefabricated panels for retrofitting, but in this case were made out of wood, so manufactured in a wood factory in near Tallinn. So these as well incorporated the design for disassembly approach when designing and producing the panels. They use, of course, bio-based materials such as wood and blown wool for the insulation. Several of the building materials, elements, and components from the existing building were reused and upcycled and used elsewhere. And the project also interestingly used scaffoldless methods to install the insulation, which significantly reduced the disruption for residents. The manufacturing company producing the wooden panels also interestingly adopted a one-stop shop approach when it came to procurement. So essentially they provided both the design and the construction work for the cooperative in this case, In this case, the building was organized, the homeowners were organized in a cooperative, as is common in Estonia. But most of all, the impact. What's the impact of this pilot project in Estonia? So this pilot, small scale, was the starting point for a state subsidy program, actually at Estonian level. So it inspired the Estonian government to set up a dedicated budget to initiate a subsidy program to mainstream this kind of prefabricated renovation at national level. So quite impressive. These are the before and after pictures of renovation. And some snapshots of the production of the wooden panels in factory. And well, with the Drive Zero project, I think Housing Europe has learned a lot about how to renovate and build differently, in a more circular way, less resource intensive. But of course, these stay pilots, innovative pilots. But how can we jump into a larger scale and mainstream these kind of practices? Well, this project, I think, serves to identify a series of barriers to upscale these circular retrofits in the social public cooperative housing sector. One of them that I believe most of you will be familiar with is the insufficient financing for these type of renovations, as well as the lack of skilled labor and the higher cost of materials are not really allowing these pilot projects to scale up. We've also seen how housing providers are lacking material banks where to leave building components, building materials, building elements from existing buildings, and where to take them to reuse them in future projects. There's also a lack of certification and standards for these reused materials that makes it more challenging to comply with regulations and encourage providers to use this type of secondary materials in their projects. Next to this, many housing providers within the sector have rent models that are based on income, which allows for planned maintenance of buildings, but definitely does not allow for new retrofitting standards that require quite high upfront financing. So in general, we've seen how the sector has a strong willingness to innovate in how they renovate homes, but often current public procurement rules are favoring price over sustainability criteria, which is also challenging the transition towards a more circular built environment. And finally, we've seen how among social public cooperative housing providers, there's a perceived uncertainty about the availability of bio-based materials, reused materials, and there's also uncertainty about the providers available in the market that can provide for these type of products. So I would like to end up based on the last barrier, but by presenting as well one of the outcomes of the Drive Zero project, which is an online catalog, circularhomes.eu, that brings together different construction products and providers working with bio-based sustainable circular products for construction. So this is a valuable source, I think, for the sector and in general for the construction sector to help move forward in a transition towards a more circular built environment. So have a look, and it's quite informative and educational, and it serves the purpose of mitigating this need and uncertainty for more knowledge in this area. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tara. And I think important to note there that all of the links that you mentioned, we will add to the LinkedIn group dedicated to this topic, which we will share with the material. I think what you've shown there is one of the key messages also from our next session, so focusing on sufficiency, using what's already there. So what the pilots that you described in Ireland and Estonia are indeed based on extending the life of the existing housing in that case, but using circular processes. And you mentioned as well maintaining an affordable price also for the people living there. So you mentioned, of course, some of the obstacles, but good to see that we've got those pilots on the ground. And of course, people can actually go and visit those and visit the people living in the homes, together with the local authorities. So we're going to now go further onto that topic of sufficiency, using what's already there. And we're going to hear from Kate Joyce, so Tua Housing, member of Irish Council of Social Housing, to talk about your project, where you converted office buildings to housing. So a very hot topic at the moment when we look around some of our cities, and many of us can see that potential. But of course, it's important to hear from the actors who've already implemented those projects. So please go ahead.
Thanks, Circa. Thanks very much for inviting me this morning. So just by way of introduction, my name is Kate Joyce. I'm Head of Sustainability and Projects in Tua. Tua is one of Ireland's largest approved housing bodies. We currently manage about 12,000 properties with approximately 30,000 tenants. And the method of delivery for new housing in Tua is through a combination of turnkey acquisitions, direct construction and renovation. And there is an increased focus on renovation and retrofitting in recent years. So last year we completed 2 large office to residential renovation projects, and I'm going to talk to you this morning just about one of those. If you can move on to the next slide, please. The next one again, yeah. Okay, so this is, there's a video here which I will show, but just before that, Park West Plaza in Dublin 12 it was the very first large-scale office to residential conversion project in Ireland. The former office block had never been occupied and lay vacant for 20 years. It's located in a business campus about 12 kilometres outside of Dublin city centre, but close to a number of key transport links, which was important, and also surrounded by communities with high social housing need. Planning permission for the renovation was granted back in 2017, but for a lower number of units. A revised planning application was then approved in 2021 with a higher number of units, totaling 86 apartments, and that improved the financial viability, which facilitated it really getting off the ground. So Tua signed a fixed price contract in April 2021, and it closed in November 2022, and there's now over 200 residents living on site. So as said, it was a renovation from a 7,500 square metre office space to 86 1- and 2-bed apartments. The average apartment size is 83 square metres. You can see some of this in the video, which is substantial compared to other new build delivery, and also due to the original size of the windows. You know, it's flooded with natural light. All the units have a minimum energy rating ranging from B or B1 to A2. So it's in terms of energy efficiency, it performs very strongly. In terms of design, there were a number of features about the original office building which remain, which include internal metal staircase. Also, a number of the apartments have retained the original concrete uprights and pillars, which have actually, you know, been incorporated as a design feature. As you'll see there from the video, the external of the main office building appears to have changed very little, but you know, we did have to make some amendments to the interior side in terms of reducing, insulating the upper and lower parts of the windows to make them more usable space. We also added garden rooms to each apartment to address the requirement to have some element of external living space. And then they also benefit from hot water heat pumps, heat recovery ventilation systems, and the block themselves benefit from PV solar panels. Just a further knock-on of this renovation was that which I suppose reinforces the benefit of this sort of urban redesign or regeneration, is that the wider development had included a number of social amenities, including a restaurant and a gym, and shops which had closed down due to the extended time that the office block had laid vacant. Since occupation, there's been reopening of local retail, a coffee shop, you know, a local grocery store and a pharmacy, and that's really due to the additional 200 people moving in. So if you just move on to the next slide now, please. So as I mentioned, our intention as an organisation is to commit to more renovation projects of this type. But in order to support that, we needed to give it, you know, support it in a more considered and planned way into the future. We really needed to understand the benefits beyond just the additionality of social housing. And so we had to look at it from the perspective of just our tenants, but also from carbon saving. And that allows us to provide non-financial metrics when we go to our credit committees or our board or our funders to get these development appraisals off the ground. So for Park West, we completed a cradle to grave carbon assessment using LCA methodology. And the LCA measured the whole life carbon impact of the building. So taking account of the initial material extraction through to the end of life. So that's including your operational emissions. And we compared the life cycle analysis that we completed on the Park West renovation against a comparable new build of same size and quantum, and a demolition and new build. So the graph on the right-hand side shows you the total carbon emissions, and I think it's quite self-explanatory. The green bar on the left-hand side is Park West, the grey bar in the middle is a new build of comparable size, and the bar on the right, the black bar, is a demolition and new build. So what the LCA has confirmed is the enormous benefits in terms of carbon and material savings for a renovation project of this type. The whole of life carbon emissions report a 62% reduction. So 62% reduction in whole of life emissions compared to a new build. And if you actually look at that, if you narrow that down to just looking at embodied carbon emissions, it actually reflected an 82% reduction. So it was really, really quite a stark result. On the next slide, please. So this is a graph of material emissions. So again, you can see the most significant saving is around concrete. So there's been negligible concrete emissions in Park West versus an estimate 1,600 tonnes of CO2 equivalent, which would be emitted in a new build of a similar type. The other material all generally are kind of in or around the same line, but the savings in terms of concrete were substantial. And then on the next slide again. So this looks at transport emissions. And what this is showing is that between transporting material waste and also bringing cement in and out of site, by not having to do that, the transport emissions reduced by 700 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. So, you know, the LCA just really demonstrated the carbon saving, and what it has enabled it to do is to, I suppose, put forward stronger arguments as to why we should continue to undertake similar renovation projects like this. In the case of Park West, we completed the carbon analysis after the project was completed, and as a result, we had about 30% raw data and 70% secondary data, and that meant in some cases, using the LCA methodology, the material quantities had to be upscaled. So, you know, it would have been more beneficial for us to have been started it out at the outset. So that's something that we've also taken on board. So we're now going to be completing LCAs at the outset of any of our larger renovation projects. So what I mean by that is any projects that are above 20 units. If you go on to the next slide, please. So this is just an example of similar renovation that TUA is involved in. On the top right-hand corner, Springville House in Cork. This was also a 1970s office block. It had been vacant for about 5 or 6 years, so it had been used for a period of time. And that was renovated in 2022 from the office to 35 apartments for the elderly. Also down on the bottom right-hand corner and on the left, you'll see Douglas Hyde in Cork City and the Maris College in Athlone. These are renovation projects. One is completed, the other is ongoing, which is a conversion from former convent buildings to residential. So thanks very much. That's just an overview of what we're doing in TUA. I hope it was helpful.
That's really helpful, Kate. And then I mean, obviously, this is not going to meet all of the housing needs in Ireland. I know this is just the example you gave us already, a significant number, 200 homes. Obviously, there's thousands of homes needed annually, tens of thousands of homes needed annually. However, it is part of the picture. And are there a couple of incentives? What would help multiply this type of project in the Irish context?
Well, I think part of the reason why we undertook that LCA was because we felt that we needed to be able to demonstrate, you know, kind of a really concrete, excuse the pun, but just to be able to benefit the very obvious carbon saving, and TUA have only recently formalized a sustainability strategy. But having done that, we've been able to put a commitment in place that we will commit to a certain number of renovation projects per year. So I think even getting it just into our strategy and, you know, going out to our peers to confirm that we've done the same will also mean that there'll be, I suppose, a greater focus in this area. In terms of funding, it was funded through our traditional model. So it was a combination of private finance and capital finance from the Housing Finance Agency, in which, you know, funds social housing. As I mentioned at the outset, it took a while to get it off the ground. It had to be redesigned to make it more viable, to maximise the number of units that could be facilitated on site, and that's what kind of slowed it down to taking off. So I suppose just around the efficiencies of scale enabled us to then go to the market to get private finance, but, you know, like that we had to tap the private market. So if there was availability of government funding that focused on these type of projects, that would obviously would help us do more. You know, we're only tipping the surface, like you mentioned.
Yeah, no, a very key message there, and we're going to need these types of messages coming from local level as the conversation advances here in Brussels. And just very appreciated the point you made also. So this whole focus on the sort of dematerialization, so getting more value from the existing materials. But you also mentioned the value that went back into the community. And I think this is something, so we're ticking quite a few boxes there. So we provide, with this initiative, you valued the materials, obviously, but you also produced added value, obviously providing those homes, but also the local economy. So you mentioned the reinvigoration of local services and facilities. So this is how Housing Europe hope to see the conversation also going at European level, to see this agenda as one that can really be all encompassing in a way, and a good vehicle for social cohesion. Thank you so much, Kate. I know you have a busy morning too. I think you're going to stay with us for a few more minutes, but now we're going from another
Thank you.
And Karine Puyol, thank you for joining us.
Hello, Rebecca.
Hi there. So Karine from Union Sociale pour l'Habitat, you're going to just give us a bit of an insight into the actions some of your members are taking on the reuse of materials and densification.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Soraka. So this week, because I was there last week, I will speak about how to reduce the carbon footprint from our sector, from social housing sector, and be able to deliver more social housing. So I will speak first about densification. So densification in France is a big issue, because in coming years it will be forbidden to build in empty spaces. So we will have to produce social housing in the cities, in the existing city. So it means that how we do to build more social housing with less spaces. The other difficulty or the other challenge is how to do with people. How people dream to live in density spaces. This is a very big issue, and we will see how we can do. And also we will speak about the role of local authority in this question of densification. Indeed, local authority is a key actor. So before this question of densification, it was easier. We just have to have an empty land and build big buildings, and that's it. And to do densification in the city is more, I would say, delicate work. In French, we say travailler dans la dentelle. It could be they could have frustration on it, because it's smaller project. You have to find, for example, small land in the city, but it's becoming rare and it is very expensive. Another possibility could be the construction on the top of the building, but as well it could be it is very expensive, and it is not always possible. There is a lot of technical issues on this, so it's a solution, but not the miracle solution. Another one presented by our Irish colleague is the transformation of the existing building, and indeed, administrative building, parking building, garage, or existing dwelling but not adapted to the demand could be transformed into social housing. But this is could be very expensive project with long engineering, so is a big challenge for our members. Another important issue is how to engage inhabitants and how increase their desire for density, because density mean more crowded spaces, more traffic, more noise. So how to do, as it was saying by the Irish colleague, yes, improve the quality of life is a response. So how to do it? Density mean this project to be an opportunity to develop public services, as for example crèche, health services, but also services like new shop, sportive equipment, and green spaces. This is really important, and this has been emphasized in the pandemic period. People are very sensitive to this access to green spaces. So this project have also be synonymous to an opportunity to increase the quality of life of the people. The key actors of this densification is clearly the local authority, because she will be the one be able to manage the local planification and to say we need more social housing in the city. It will be the one who will be able to regulate the land market, and this is really a key issue in this question. It will be the one who will be the leader of the partnership between the state, between the social housing provider, between tenants, and it will be the one who are able also to convince people that all these projects could be a way to improve the quality of the life. So now a project will illustrate this densification issue. So this is a project who received an award 2 weeks ago, the Équerre d'Argent. This is an architectural award. The name is Saint-Germain Island, and this is the transformation of the Ministry of the Army building in Paris into 254 social housing units with equipment like crèche, gymnasium, garden, and also with great energy and environmental standards, with an important insulation, greening of the roof and common spaces, use of energy renewable and local energy production, and also reuse of the material from the initial building. It was the wooden floor. The important things also to note in this project, it is a project located in the 3rd district of Paris. And before the project, there was only 3% of social housing. And with this project, it represented 25%. So it means that it really increased the social mix of this district. So it has to be, yes, in this sense, it's a real success. But we have to know that this type of project is really, really expensive. So we really need the involvement of all the partners to find fundings and be able to follow it. So now some words about reuse of the materials from the social housing project. So in France, I think that the demolition and renovation our sector, from the construction sector, represents 67% of the waste. So we are really a good, an important producer of waste. Few time ago, we created a platform, a social housing platform. The name of this platform is Pire, and the objective is to reuse as material. It is to mutualize the material issue from the demolition and renovation project, share the information between the member of this platform. These materials are listed in the catalog, and if you need material for your project of construction, of renovation, you have access to this catalog and you can introduce the method demand. Intelligence artificielle will manage to find your demand on this catalog. This is a national platform, so you can you become member. A social housing provider could become member of this platform, and is Pire. He has access to the library with all the materials. He has access to the documentation of about circular economy, etc. He has training on this specific question, and he has also this important possibility to connect with other members of this of Pire. This is the national one. So, and here you can see that there is so 1 month ago, there were more than 40 members of the Pire platform, and the objective is to have more and more platforms and more members to increase this possibility to exchange on the material disponible on this.
So each of the organizations here is representing a social housing provider.
Exactly. This is a USH member. Pire, so it's supported by Union Sociale pour l'Habitat. And the originality, this is a national one. And I think also is to make possibility to share, so to meet between the demand and the disponibility of the markets, and not the market, the reused market.
I think we heard from Clara Massé this morning from the Drive Zero project. Indeed, this having the reusable products at the right time presents a real logistical challenge. So exactly. I think any type of enabling initiatives like this will be useful. Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Super. Thank you so much. Thank you for the insight. And we'll be tracking that closely because I think it could be a very interesting initiative also for members in other countries. Okay, thank you. So now we're going to hear from our colleague from the European Commission, DG Environment, Josefina Lindblom, hope I say it correctly. Thanks so much, Josefina. I know you also have a very full agenda today, but you were able to fit in a little trip to our office. Yes. Thanks a lot. So I hope it was also useful and interesting for you. Very much so. You heard. Yeah. So tell us a little bit, maybe your reaction and where it fits into your work on the roadmap for reducing whole life.
Yes. So yeah, the Commission is working to set up a roadmap for the reduction of whole life carbon. We're coming up with that spring next year. And we're looking at many different kinds of ways of achieving that. So I thought a lot of the things that we have in mind really came up in the presentations that I heard before I came in here. So I thought that was really inspiring, and I'm going to take it straight home with me, to see how we can perhaps make it more concrete, those sometimes quite abstract ideas that we have, because this is really things that are happening on the ground. So, for example, I thought it was really inspiring to hear about the, what I would call the sufficiency cases that your Irish colleague, Kate, I believe, and also Quinn, talked about how they are able to use vacant spaces. I mean, that can be done for different reasons. I understood in the case of France, it was at least one reason for it was because it is going to be, or is already actually banned to construct on new areas, so to say. But it can of course be for other reasons that you choose to do that as well. So and what was really interesting with the Irish case was also that they had done the effort to do a carbon analysis, which, as we can imagine, for us working on the roadmap for the reduction of whole life carbon, that's extremely interesting to get that kind of information. Yeah, because when we are thinking of the reduction of whole life carbon, we are looking at different things. First of all, as your colleagues already set out, whole life carbon is both the operational carbon, so when we are using the building for heating and cooling and stuff, but also the embodied carbon, right, which comes with the production of the materials and so on. So we need to take a more holistic view on the carbon piece. And then I think we look at the supply and demand of materials, but also of the buildings per se. And if we want to investigate how can we reduce the demand of new buildings, because we know that new buildings are by far the ones that have, or in most cases at least, perhaps I shouldn't be too categorical, but in most cases, new buildings have the highest whole life carbon emissions, simply because the first emissions that you have, embodied carbon for a new building, is by far the biggest peak of the whole life cycle, because there's so much material being used in that. Of course, if you have an existing building, at some point they emitted this embodied carbon as well, but that's already gone, so we can't count it, so to say, right? So if we can use existing buildings where we don't have to put in too much of new material, because we already have something which is standing, we are saving an enormous amount of carbon emissions. And I thought your colleagues here showed really interesting cases of how they've worked with that, and apparently very successful as well.
So going forward into your work going up to spring, what would be useful coming from our side into feeding the process?
I would love to continue to have a conversation with you and your colleagues about those cases. Maybe there is even something else, and how you've been working. Why did you do them? How did these cases come about? What was driving that? What kind of professionals or actors, you say, were involved in it? You know, and of course, what were the main challenges? You already asked some of those questions to your colleagues, but what were the main challenges, and how could we make those kinds of activities easier to do, because they're clearly something which is very interesting for the climate as well, what your colleagues are doing. Yeah.
But just to finish up, just from your side, what maybe you cannot say a lot about it now, but what type of support could we ask for or envisage from EU level for the initiatives being taken? Because I think from the perspective we've seen this morning, they're ticking quite a few boxes in terms of also of realizing a social Green Deal, so an inclusive Green Deal, because these actors are actually ensuring that the affordability of the housing is maintained after the work is done, and they're, as we heard from the French example, increasing the supply of affordable housing from 3% to 25% in the third arrondissement in Paris. How can we work together to make sure to try to ensure that we get some support from you, and how could you imagine that type of support in terms of funding, for instance?
Yeah, I am not the funding woman, I'm afraid.
But bring the message back.
But I will certainly bring the message back, and I do think that a lot of what we've been talking about today has evolved around sufficiency.
Mhm.
And that is, as far as I know, a fairly new way of thinking in many places in Europe. And I don't think that the Commission has talked a lot about it before either, but of what I know. So I would have thought that with the different funding mechanisms that are already existing in the EU, I would be surprised if there is nothing there which we could, as we come out with a roadmap for whole life carbon, where we will talk about sufficiency as well. I would be surprised if we couldn't bring that up on the agenda also for the different funding mechanisms that we have, to make sure that that is understood also as a climate initiative in a sense, because it is.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of potential in terms of how the existing stock can be better used and
Absolutely.
optimized. I mean, it's not to take away from the fact, of course, that there's hundreds of thousands of homes also needed. We're not going to meet all of the need in Europe. However, it can be, let's say, a part of the puzzle. But thank you so much.
Thank you for having
let's
me.
continue the conversation. We're neighbours here in Brussels, so let's continue to work together on that. Thanks for taking the time today. So Josephina already started a little bit on talking about the different terminology that's used in the sector, and actually that's why I'm really happy to welcome now our colleague from Public Housing Sweden, Björk Berggren. You have to also maybe correct me on the pronunciation. So Björk, this is actually, you're going to continue a little bit on that topic that Josephina raised, talking a little bit how we are measuring and reducing embodied energy. But zooming in a little bit on the terminology, first of all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. Really nice examples, really inspiring, I would say.
True.
Yeah, so I'm from Public Housing Sweden, and my topic is like measuring and reducing embodied energy, but I will also touch the topic of embodied carbon. So when we talk about this, I think from my perspective, I'm quite theoretical maybe, but I think it's important to have the terminology correct. So we talk about embodied energy, and then usually I think it's important we have the initial embodied energy, and then the energy we have used to produce and for the product, like if you do insulation, the energy used for the insulation, and also the construction on site, like to put it in the building. And then you have the recurring embodied energy for like renovation and refurbishment. And then you have the operating energy, and then you have demolition energy. So if you want the whole life cycle, you need to include all of these four parts. But now we're talking more and more about carbon, right? I think that's a good shift where we're going towards. And then I think it's very good to get to know this European norm or standard 15978. You have these different parts of the product cycle. You can say you have the product phase when you actually do the product, A1 to 3. A4 to 6 is the construction process, and then you have B, the actual use of the buildings, like the use, the maintenance, the repair, replacement, and so on, and then the end of life. So to be sure to do this properly, you need to include all of those. And if you put on these embodied energy parts of this, it would look something like this. The only one you wouldn't include is the actual water use, which is also included in this standard. Then you have the total life cycle energy. So they overlap each other. There's no like interference between them. So it's quite complex, you would say, and I would say it's also complex, but the actual key is, of course, to have a good database. You need to have a good database because quantities of materials, I would say the contractor who will build a building or refurbish or renovate the building, he knows how much material he will use or have used. So when you have the quantities, you have, for example, 10 cubic meters of concrete, that's a lot of concrete in kilos, then you need to have this database, like 1 kilo concrete equals a specific amount of the CO2 emissions, including all these phases, of course. Then you can get the results. And if you have this database, it will be fairly easy, I would say. In Sweden already today, there's a lot of tools, like you just export your cost calculations into this tool and you get the results. And then it's you can quite fast start analyzing this and see what are the big parts, where are there smaller parts, and so on. Because if you don't get the whole picture, it's hard to know where to start to try to reduce the carbon, of course. And that's why I'm very happy, and I think a lot of Swedes are happy that we have this climate database from our National Board of Housing and Planning and Building, which is publicly available. Because I think in many other countries, you need to pay for this tool to do these calculations, but in Sweden, it's publicly available data. And they say, which is, I agree, it's quite conservative. So if you use the data from this one for concrete or for wood or whatever, you would get a fairly high number. So if you would be able to get this correct EPBD for this material like insulation, it would most likely be lower. But if you use this climate database, you're always on the safe side, so to say. You get rather high results. But it's good. It's open, it's with APIs and so on, so you can communicate with it without needing to use your fingers. You can just use an algorithm or a computer for that. So what we were afraid of a couple of years ago was, okay, but if we would increase the energy performance a lot of buildings, so now we're talking about life cycle energy, would we actually increase the total life cycle energy use? So we gathered a lot of case studies. I think it was more than 140 case studies. Some of them were using a lot of energy, so we didn't look at them then. But then we thought, okay, we have on the x-axis the operational energy, which is what we usually talk about, at the user phase, and then on the y-axis the total life cycle energy.
So the X is just the energy used for the use of the building,
Yeah.
heating.
Yeah, and the y-axis is the total, including production, demolition, and so on. So what we were afraid of was, of course, if we go down and down and down and down in operational energy, would we actually put more energy into the construction and the refurbishment, so it will start going up. But we were very happy to see, of course, was that was not the case. If you increase the energy performance, you will decrease the life cycle energy use. So there's no conflict there. It's always good to try to improve the energy performance of buildings, so to say. However, which I think is important, if we look on this is a little bit in Swedish, but I will explain it. This is another study, which is byggandet that's klimatpåverkan. It's climate impact from buildings. On the left side, you see the construction and the use of standard public housing building in Sweden. And what you see in blue is the actual CO2 impact from the building of the building. And then you have a little bit of maintenance in red, and then you have the energy use. And then you have the demolition in top of lilac. So usually you look upon this in over 50 years. That's the smaller one to the left. And then you see actually when you do it like this, when looking at 50 years in Sweden, now we have actually a 50-50, like 50% of the CO2 impact is from building the building and 50% of the impact is from using the building. So in relative terms, it starts to be really, really important looking upon how you're actually building or renovating buildings. But what I want to stress also is usually we use buildings for more than 50 years. So actually it's maybe more like the one on the other side, which is much more higher. That's using the building for 100 years. And of course, then the green one, energy use is increasing, but also refurbishments and so on. But I think that's still in terms. So it starts to get more and more important. Like, okay, we know what type of insulation do we want to have? Do we want to have this like new insulation made from new materials, or can we find something reused, recycled?
Also of materials for the use in insulation.
Yeah,
yeah.
So, and you need, of course, to do this. And what I think is quite good already today in Sweden, you have to do these calculations, but there's no threshold. So by law, every time you build a new building, you have to do the calculations of the CO2 impact. but most likely starting in 2025, there will be a maximum limit of 300. You're not allowed to go above that. Going back to this one, you see this building would be the blue part is precisely below, so they would be allowed to build this building again. But if you would get a bigger impact from the production, it would not be allowed to do it. And that's only the production phase by law by 2025. And they're excluding photovoltaics. A little bit strange maybe, but it's because there's a big insecurity there. And also what they say, fixed interiors, like the toilet and the dishwasher and so on. And then the idea is that we will tighten this threshold by every 5 years. And from 2027, we will also include the operational phase, and that's B2, B4, B6, and C1 to C4. So there's a big shift going towards CO2, which I think is really nice. I sometimes compare it with cars. 20 years ago, we talked about how much fuel do we actually use to go a specific length. But now we're always talking about how much CO2 do we emit from the cars per kilometer or per whatever. And I think we're seeing the same shift within buildings, going from how much energy or primary energy do they use to how much is the CO2 impact from the buildings, including the whole life cycle. And that's
So thanks a lot. It's good to hear also how it's developing in Sweden. So we're looking here in Housing Europe at the European developments, but of course, if some of the national developments can already give us some hints on how it could go, that's really useful. And of course, at the heart of it is our mission to make sure that we still manage to deliver affordably at the end of this,
of course,
process. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And we'll continue now and we'll go back to European level. And I hope Fernando Suchas from EBC is online. Yes.
Hello, good morning.
Hello, Fernando. Thanks a lot for linking in. What we would be very interesting to hear from you. So you're on the program, indeed, the Construction 2050 Alliance. Of course, you cannot speak for the Construction 2050 Alliance, just to make sure you're a member of that alliance, as is Housing Europe, but you're speaking today just on behalf of the European Builders Confederation. And it would be good just to get a bit of an introduction to your organization and where you stand on this issue and where you see developments going.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation, and sorry for not being there next to you. It is very challenging schedules for the moment, as you can imagine. So yes, EBC, the European Builders Confederation, is the umbrella organization representing national associations of construction crafts and SMEs. So we represent exclusively the point of view of the micro, small, and a few medium-sized companies, construction companies in Europe. And we are based, of course, in Brussels as well. Our organization representing small contractors means that we have a very local point of view from our members, because most of small contractors, construction companies, are active at the local level, are very local economic operators. Their perimeter of activity is limited. So yes, that component is very important for us. Then regarding indeed let's say the political landscape, the policy landscape as well, that it will affect and is affecting construction, there are a lot of changes. We are asked or invited, encouraged to change the way we build or renovate, to change the type of products we are supposed to use, to change the way we do and operate on our sites. We are asked to do more efforts in finding qualified people, and the qualified part is important because with the complexification of the landscape affecting construction, we're not only looking for enough people, we're looking people with a certain skill set that is now more ambitious than was in the past. We also are asked to improve training. We're asked to respect certification requirements overall raise the ambition because the environmental ambition of the European Union is very high. But at the same time, we need a profit margin so that the business can run. And that is a very difficult balancing exercise because when we talk about bringing down emissions, including in social public housing, we need to think that all these evolution might affect the price. And in very economic challenging moments, the affordability is an issue that, at least in our organization, we consider crucial because we need people to have the means to invest in renovation with small gestures, but also with larger scale ambition. And this is something that we are trying to find solutions with our clients, basically, so that we find there a system that is win-win for everyone.
Yes, indeed. Talking about diversification of the types of operations, we heard a few examples. I don't know if you managed to tune in earlier, that very often we're not talking about this greenfield, large-scale developments, but more often reuse of existing sites, going into the fabric of the city. And this comes with this, as you say, different types of challenges. And from European level, what do you think would help your members in this challenge to go towards a more lower emissions in your sector?
SMEs usually take time to adapt to change. And now we're not talking about one single change or a few changes. We're really talking about, I would say, a small revolution in construction with a lot of, let's say, policy requests, a lot of ambition that for us now needs to turn into something more pragmatic. It needs to be set in motion in practice because we are told by notably BPIE recently, the Building Performance Institute of Europe, that we're lagging behind. So lagging behind means that we're not doing enough in practice. And the people we represent in EBC are very hands-on people. They need now to see how the landscape they're going to navigate in the coming years is going to affect their day-to-day activity, because they need to know if, let's say, sustainable finance will impact the way they get access to loans, to credit. They need to know if recycled products, secondary materials, or quality enough or affordable enough to make them mainstream, but also that clients are better informed about the potential of that innovation in a way, because clients are also leading the conversation on how things, how we are invited to deal with a project. So what we need now is really to test all this legislation that has come our way, so that we try to catch up with, let's say, everything that should have been done earlier. And also that we see where there are still, let's say, maybe I wouldn't say loopholes, but points of improvement, but coming from a bottom-up approach, coming from the practice. When we have an EPBD that is implementable, when we do have a construction product regulation that affects construction activities, when we do have many other files that will impact construction, so that we see now how we can keep developing, let's say, parts to make the Green Deal, and especially for our renovation wave, a reality. So the environmental ambition is welcome, but we also need, again, to find that balance with the setting in motion of all that new policy tools that we have.
I think this is a really good point and a good finish up in a way to today's session. As you mentioned, many different policy dossiers that are going to have an impact on this, and our members, and as you've just outlined, your members are also waiting for that clarity on how we go forward. And the clarity on the legislation, and also to make sure that the funding instruments are clear and that they're actually going to be supported in this mission. So thanks a lot, Fernando. Likewise, the conversation will continue. We're on this journey together. We have massive emissions targets. Our sectors have a lot to do, and let's work on it together. Thanks a lot again for dropping in.
Thank you, Sorka.
I'll see you soon. So thank you very much. So we're really coming to the end of today's session, and just a little bit of a reflection. I mean, we've covered quite a lot of ground. We've seen inspiring examples that are genuinely ticking all the boxes. So from increasing density, it's often an element that we don't focus enough on, because very often a big part of the emissions is coming from mobility. So obviously, if we can act on the density of housing, we are also ticking that box. So reducing the emissions coming from transport, and it's often left out of the equation. And I think we've also entered the challenge of making sure this agenda, so the Green Deal and the agenda to reduce emissions, becomes also a social project, not just a technical project. But we have to look at this agenda very much as was exemplified by the projects today from Ireland and France, how we can turn the challenge of reducing emissions into a social inclusion project. How can we increase the value from materials, but at the same time put more value into our local economies? And I think we're seeing more examples of that, but what our challenge would be is to make sure this raft of legislation comes through also with the right support for social housing providers to turn this into projects that actually will improve also the standard of living and quality of life. I think it came through very strongly from the examples today. So just to mention all of the different legislation that's going to have an impact on this agenda, which we are navigating for you at Housing Europe. So if we look at the construction products regulation, the carbon adjustment mechanism, the green public procurement, obviously the skills around procurement, the legal skills needed within local authorities and within social housing providers are definitely going to be impacted by the push to decarbonize. The eco-design sustainable products regulation, of course, also the EU taxonomy. We saw the recently produced Circular Economy Draft Delegated Act. So how we can make sure we have more finance directed to the type of projects we talked about today. Crucially also, as also mentioned by Fernando, the Energy Performance of Building Directive now being finalized, which includes an indicator on embodied carbon. The emissions trading system, which is now being extended to buildings and particularly to heating systems which are high emitters. And the directive on soil monitoring and resilience, the nature restoration law, and also mentioned today the upcoming communication on carbon emissions reduction for 2040. So really a raft of different legislation that is going to have an impact on this agenda, and where we have to make sure that our vision is also heard. And there's a few also recommendations that have been coming through from the Drive Zero project and from local social housing providers that are working to multiply the type of projects we saw. And it's just some of them coming through from relevant for local, national level, some of them more relevant for EU level. And one of the points that was interesting, we saw in the projects in Estonia and Ireland, a strong focus on new facades, so new reusable facades. And what was actually made, the point made from local actors was that often planning permission needed at local level can slow down innovation in that respect. So in this case, in the example shown, that it wasn't needed to change building codes. However, it has been brought to our attention that very often innovation, so the industrial production of reusable facade, for instance, and the rollout of those types of approaches can actually be slowed down because of local building codes. We've also realized that some of the other innovative approaches are actually slow to move in to larger markets, away from a mere pilots, because of building codes. This could be something that at European level would be very useful to look at. So are building codes unnecessarily slowing down the road to circularity and emission reductions? And a key point I think that came through also today is the need for more clear financial resources for the projects themselves, but also for the social management and the engagement. So we heard from also from our colleague Karine Puyol, a lot of the work being done by social housing providers is also to work on co-creation, so acceptance of the residents of the renovation projects. And very often what we see indeed is that there's not necessarily the finance available to look at that community outreach. So I think to really wrap it up, a lot of progress needs to be made. We need to focus in on those successful pilots. We need a clearer idea of what is the potential, what is the precise potential of the reuse of existing buildings, but realizing that indeed it's not going to fulfill the total housing need that we are facing. Indeed, we need to focus on making sure we have physical space on the one hand, but also the carbon space to deliver also the new homes. Of course, we will work on bringing down as far as possible the carbon emissions from the delivery of new homes, but there's a strong recognition needed that does need to happen. We won't solve the housing crisis only with existing buildings. I think crucially, finishing off, this acknowledgement that renovation goes beyond materials and energy, includes people and local socioeconomic needs. I think this is an important step to make this a politically attractive project, to make it a project that really will improve citizens' quality of life. And I think this is something we need to really tackle if we're going to have an uptake of this circularity agenda. So let's finish off there. Thank you very much for joining this second edition of Innovation Bites. So it's just the tip of the iceberg, I think, on this conversation, but one that really needs to happen. We will continue the series next year. We will be looking at actually the impact of ESG, so the impact of the ESG on financing for the social, public and cooperative sector. And then continuing on also with a session on funding available for innovation in the sector from European level, which I think could be very interesting for some of you. So thank you very much for joining, and we will be posting all of the links on our LinkedIn page, Dialogue for Community, remind me of the title, Dialogue for... The title changed. So we will share the link for our LinkedIn group when we follow up to this session. So don't be worried if you missed out on where to get some of the resources. Thank you so much for joining, and goodbye.